When I was in my senior year of high school, 17 years old, all that was on my and my friends' minds were girls. There was one girl in particular in my physics class that I was really into. Her name was Tiffany. Some guys called her Crazy Tiff because she was super hot, but also apparently really crazy according to her exes. That's irrelevant to this story, though basically my best friend CJ managed to get one of Tiffany's best friends, Gianna, to agree to come hang out at some beach with him and I that night, since it was a Friday and the weather was really the best part. Tiffany agreed to come with this. Was it my big chance with Crazy Tiff CJ pulled up to my house at 10 o'clock that night? I hopped in shotgun and went to pick up Tiffany and Gianna on our way there. We agreed our first priority was getting me alone with Tiffany and CJ getting alone with Gianna. I was extremely nervous, but when Tiffany and Gianna got in the car, things were actually going pretty smoothly. CJ and I managed to make them laugh a bunch of times by the time we got to the beach. I was confident Tiffany and I would vibe really well with her. And remember the tiny details of what happened after we stepped out of the car and onto the dunes. I do remember the beach being completely void of any other people, and CJ somehow managed to go off alone with Gianna into the darkness after a few minutes. Just like we planned, Tiffany and I took a walk down to the water and wet our feet and whatnot. Then we just laid in the sand and talked for a while. Things were going smoothly until Tiffany pointed out to the ocean instead. She said I looked to where she was pointing but didn't see anything. I was laughing at her apparent delusion and got up to go closer to the water in hopes of maybe seeing what she saw. My feet touched the cold water. That's when I was close enough to see it. There was a long, vertically standing object in the water. I entered a little closer, so it moved. I jumped out of the water and ran back to Tiffany. "It's a person," I said quietly to her. It was truly bizarre, the fact that anyone would be in the freezing cold water at this hour. Tiffany wanted to move because she started. We looked out to the ocean and I heard Tiffany gasp. The guy was out there again. I was gonna go out there and tell him to back off, but Tiffany told me, "Let's just go Moki." I was hoping she would. I just wanted to look tough in front of her. He got back to the car. CJ and Gianna weren't back yet. Suddenly my phone started blowing up with texts, all from CJ. Apparently he'd been texting me in some kind of panic the whole time. We were on the beach, and I guess I didn't have reception out by the water. He texted me first, saying, "Dude, some weird guy is in the water watching us." And then, "Yo, some weird deformed-looking guy is stalking us. Get to the car." Now 5 minutes later, he sent a couple other texts, basically panicking over being followed by something in the dark. Keywords. Something, not someone. Something. His second to last text said he was coming to look for us and to answer me. When I got this, his last text was, "We're on our way back to the car, now get there." He also tried calling me 3 times. Apparently I called him back at once, and he picked up right away out of breath, not even letting me speak. All he asked was if we were at the car, and I said yes. He said, "Good, stay right there," and hung up the phone. Less than 30 seconds later, Gianna and CJ came out of the surrounding darkness next to the Jeep. He explained the best he could while trying to catch his breath, that some deformed-looking creature walking on 2 legs was following them. I didn't know whether to laugh at what he said or not. I told him about how he saw someone in the white or 2. He asked me to describe what it looked like. I kept getting confused by his way of describing the person, as if they were a creature. I told him it looked like a really tall, lanky person standing in the water. He said he got a chance to get a closer look at it, and it was some kind of deformed humanoid thing. Tiffany and I looked at each other, and now he kind of nervously left. What he was saying was just too bizarre, but I think parts of both of us took him seriously. Gianna vouched for what he was saying. That scream made us all jump into the car. It was some kind of half-human, half-demonic kind of screaming. I can't describe it, you just have to hear it. Needless to say, we were all frantic in the car, asking CJ questions mainly, but closer to the end of the ride, we all grew silent. I guess we were all just lost in our thoughts about what just happened. To give you an idea of how quickly all this happens, we were on the dunes for about half an hour after I heard that sound, that scream. I did start to believe CJ partially, but I still feel like what I saw in the ocean was a person. But CJ's way of describing who or what was following him as some kind of deformed humanoid thing on the beach is what still freaks me out the most. Our old town in Florida was right by a bunch of different beaches. My sisters and I would frequently go to the beach during the sunset hours because less people were there, and the views were always beautiful. Sometimes we'd play volleyball, sometimes we'd go in the water, and sometimes we'd just lay in the sand. My youngest sister, Ksenia, I was 13 years old. wanted to go on the water one night. The sun was setting, and it was getting dark out. So as the older brother, and basically the supervisor, I told her to be back in 10 minutes. She ran into the water, and after watching her for about a minute, I looked down at my phone. My other sister was 16 years old, wanted to play volleyball. I was up for it. There was a volleyball net and a poorly inflated volleyball. Sitting next to it, it was good enough. Though we made do with it when I looked away from the volleyball net. I couldn't see Ksenia. I looked every possible direction she could have gone in the water. I did not see her. It was getting darker and harder to see. I ran to the water to try and find Ksenia. I ran into the water, and when I couldn't run anymore, I swam. She wasn't in the water anywhere, but I saw a boat nearby. A big, luxurious boat close enough to swim over to. It took me a couple minutes, but I got there. I hoisted myself up onto the bow off some tiny step. Below deck, there was a hatch door that was opened, and there were lights on down there. I called out for help. Then there was silence. I called out that I was looking for my sister. Then I heard Ksenia. It's from below the deck. She called out my name. I hurried down the stairs into the cabin to see Ksenia sitting on a bed with the coke in her hands. Further down the cabin were two grown-ass men sitting opposite her. Each other looking at me, I grabbed Ksenia into my arms, and one of the men said with a smile that I have a very nice sister. The other man seemed to catch on to my suspicion right away, and claimed that the two of them were just offering to give her a ride and some snacks because they saw her all alone in the water. I didn't even say a word to them. One of them asked if we needed a ride back to shore. I didn't answer him. I told Ksenia to swim back to the beach. With me, we got back to shore in a couple minutes, and the boat was far gone into the sunset. I brought my two sisters home and had my dad figure out what he should do. First of all, he was mad at me for not getting details of the boat or the men's faces, and he was right. My dad punished Ksenia and prohibited her from going to the beach past sunrise from there on out. I have a beach house in Florida that I tend to visit with my girlfriends on the colder months up north. In the warmer months, we'd still visit occasionally, but nowhere near as much since there wasn't as much of a need to. It was early February, freezing up in Connecticut, so my girlfriend and I took a trip down to Florida to visit the beach house. By the time we actually got to the house after the day of drive, it was starting to get dark out. It was actually a long month and a half since I'd been there. At the time, the electricity, the water, and everything was already on since it was wintertime. And I kept everything on during the winter season due to our frequent visits. So all we had to do when we arrived to the house was unpack, take a couple lounge chairs, and walk 20 seconds onto the beach and take a nap. We didn't even check out any of the other rooms because we were so drained. We lounged down the beach until it got really dark, that my girlfriends had my shoulder. I looked up at her, and she asked if I left that light on. I turned to the house and saw one of the upstairs lights on. Not just that, but at one of the windows in that room, there was a shadow outlined behind the partially opened curtains. I looked at my girlfriends and she looked at me. And I think it sunk into both of us that someone was in that room at that window. I told her to wait there. I ran to the house as fast as I could. When I got to the back doors, when I started being quiet, I slid it open and shut quietly. And being that I was barefoot, it made tiptoeing a bit easier. I made it to the stairway, and then halfway up the stairs before I heard the door shut. Upstairs, I went up the remaining stairs a bit quicker now, and saw that the door to the room that had the light on was open, but the lights were off now. I went into the room which had the light on. Even 2 minutes ago, I kept the light on, though. Instead, I just used the flashlight which I had in the shelf ledge upstairs. Then I remembered the closet door. It was shut. That must have been the door. I heard closed. I figured I shut off the flashlight as I tiptoed to the door of the closet and slowly put my ear up to it to listen. There was nothing but silence in the room, and on the other side of the closet, door. I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I opened that door, if someone was in fact on the other side, but I had to confront this. I read the two little knobs and finally brought myself to yank the doors open, but it was empty in there, or at least from what I could tell it was dark. I grabbed my flashlight and switched it on, and yep, the closet was empty. But a creak in the floorboards outside of the room caught my attention. I ran into the hall expecting to see the intruder, but no, it was just my girlfriends. I got mad at her for coming into the house, even though I told her to stay put. But now that she was there, I told her to help search the upstairs. We looked around in all 3 bedrooms, upstairs, all the closets, and the bathroom, but there was no one. Then we checked the downstairs, every room, every closet, no one. We had to figure that whoever was in the house somehow escaped, so we locked the doors and looked around the house for any signs of breaking and entering or stolen items, but there was neither of that. So we brushed up and went to bed, since we were exhausted. However, that night, before we could even fall asleep, there was a click under our bed. I asked my girlfriend if she could hear that. She said yes. I got out from under the bed and got down on my knees when my face got to the ground, giving me a view. Under the bed, I could see the intruder. Laying under our bed, I looked at him face to face before he crawled out and made a break for the front door. I couldn't catch him once he got outside, because I was still barefoot. I also didn't get a very good look at his face, because we only looked at each other for about a second. We once again searched the whole house to see what he could have stolen. But surprisingly, nothing was stolen. We couldn't even figure out how he broke. We didn't call the cops. We simply moved on and did our best to enjoy the rest of our vacation. As the waves softly lapped at the shore, carrying away the echoes of our haunting experience, I realized that our encounters at the beach were more than just fleeting moments of fear. They were glimpses into a world beyond our understanding, a realm where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. If these tales of eerie beachside mysteries have sent shivers down your spine and left you craving more, don't let the journey end here. Join us in uncovering more dark mysteries by subscribing to Nightmare Realm. Your likes and shares are the lanterns that guide us through the fog of the unknown. Together, let's brave the depths of the unexplained and the supernatural. Remember, every subscribe, like, and share not only supports our channel, but also keeps you connected to the ever-expanding universe of the mysterious and the inexplicable.
Flexing ain't discreet about it. Extra real about it. Say you wanna be.
Before I was a senior when this happened, senior writers had fully kicked in. It was football season. Our high school was always big on football games because our football team was actually good, and there's nothing else to do in our boring country-ass town one day. At school, we were in some joke of an elective. My friend JJ was in this class with me. So we'd always mess around. It was a Friday, and there was a football game later that day. So we planned to go, and JJ, being the sweet talker, he's always been spun his chair around to face these girls, Kayla and Ashley, and asked them to go to the football game with us. We already knew them well, so it wasn't weird of him to invite them or anything. They seemed down to meet us later, so JJ dropped me off at home after school. And like 4 hours later, he picked me up, and then we picked up Kayla and Ashley. Then we drove to the school back parking lot by the woods. We had some Four Locos in the car, making sure nobody was passing by. Then we poured some more into water bottles to bring to the bleachers with us. We walked over to make sure we got good seats at the top row of the bleachers. Since the game started late, it started getting dark during the third quarter. And by the fourth quarter, it was dark. Our team was losing pretty bad for a change this game. So bad even that a lot of the kids in the bleachers were leaving early. We just stayed planning on hanging out on the field after the game ended and our team lost really bad. And so the field and bleachers were quiet. People were scurrying off the bleachers. The team rushed back inside the locker room in embarrassment. The away team slowly made their way back to the buses. Within 10 minutes, we were among the only people left in the bleachers, minus a couple others. And maybe a couple people in the field. We were honestly drunk by this point, and the team's defeat wasn't ruining our fun. When the field lights turned off, it was basically pitch black here. Minus the moonlight, everyone was gone. We went to go lay in the field. JJ ran to his car to get more alcohol by now. It was probably 10 o'clock. JJ said, "Let's go in the woods next to the football field." The girls, of course, were scared, and that's why the idea seemed fun when they wouldn't budge. We both got up and ran towards the woods, leaving them alone in the dark, knowing they'd get scared and follow us, which they did. We crawled under the little ripped chunk of fence that kids would use to get into the woods, and then started walking down the little hill, into the woods. The girls were very reluctant to follow, but they did. We ran, had to lose them and hide, just to mess with them as soon as they heard us running. They both failed to stop. They tried to keep up, but we lost them and hid behind a couple trees. We hid and laughed for a few seconds. Then JJ patted me and told me to look in that direction, and though it was dark, we could see. Perhaps only because of the moonlight barely finding its way through the trees, a towering black figure maybe 15 feet away from us standing between two trees. It was we didn't see the legs moving or what we assumed were legs. We heard no footsteps sounds. JJ and I turned and ran. We ran and called the girls' names until we found them. Then they followed us out of the woods. We told them to just follow us to the car and run at the car. We finally told them that some 7-foot-tall woman was in the woods. JJ said that if I hadn't seen it as well, he would have thought that he saw an apparition. The girls were freaked out, asking us to tell them that we were kidding. We weren't. We watched from the car to see if anyone came out of the woods. No one ever did. The biggest question is, why would an older woman be in there at night alone? It's not like it was a nature trail. It was a fenced-off wooded area. Our school didn't have security back then either. So it wasn't bad. The 4 of us went to go hang out at JJ's after, and I'll leave the rest of that night to your imagination. Now we're really fast-forwarding to that summer when I was working at the school one final time as a summertime custodian, since I got a raise every summer that I'd return. There were about 4 of us in the building, 2 older custodians and myself, and another 18-year-old. I was in the center courtyard of the school, mowing the grass when I spotted someone at an upstairs window. It was an older woman. She looked like 65 maybe from a distance with short curly hair. Her face was kind of blurry. I stopped mowing and looked at her. She didn't wave back. She didn't wave. I basically ran inside to where my boss was, and as to that woman upstairs, was he asked who? I told him to follow me. She was in one of the math classrooms. I led him to the upstairs math hallway. But to my surprise, all the classroom doors were closed, and the lights were all off. Classroom, it looked like she was in, was empty. My boss told me there was no one else in the building and that I need to drink some coffee. He went back downstairs, so I did the same. I was genuinely freaking out. After I finished mowing, I started mopping the upstairs hallways and classrooms. Eventually I was in the math hallway, and I would be mopping every last classroom floor up there. So I opened all the doors and turned on all the lights. I had my radio on the floor playing music as usual. Over the music, I heard a distinct woman's voice. It said, "Young man." It came from one of the classrooms. I couldn't tell which, but I turned off the music and started checking every nearby classroom, desperately hoping to find someone. Every single classroom was empty. I even checked behind the desks. The hairs on my arms were standing up. I felt a fight-or-flight response kick in. I bailed to the downstairs and told my boss once again, "Someone's up there." I heard a voice. Now he, once again, went up there with me, and I explained that I couldn't find anyone, but I saw and now heard a woman up here when we didn't find anyone again. He told me to go home and take the day off and get some sleep. He thought I was crazy. I then put the 2 incidents together. What if they were connected? What if what JJ and I saw in the woods and what I saw and heard in that classroom are somehow related? When I came back to work the next day, I told my boss I just didn't want to work in the math hallway because I was freaked out for the rest of the summer. I didn't go in that hallway again. Ever since then, I full-heartedly believe that my old high school is haunted by some spirit of an older woman. I have no other explanations. Music. This happened when I was 15, a sophomore in high school. Unfortunately, lunch classes were randomized. So this year, I only had my friends Liam and Mike in that lunch period with me a few months into the school year. One day, this new kid walked in first period astronomy. Our teacher, who was a jokester, made him introduce himself to the class. His name was Craig. He teased Craig for a minute, then asked him to sit down. I sat in the back row, and the only open desk was next to me in the back corner. Craig came over and sat next to me. Class didn't technically start yet, so everyone was still chatting as Craig sat down. He looked around the room, then I felt a stare shift to me. He turned and we made eye contact. He nodded his head and said, "What's up?" I said, "Hey man, what's up?" He introduced himself, so I gave him my name as well. Craig was a white kid, with very patchy, poopish-looking facial hair. He wasn't attractive, but he wasn't buttoned up. He just looked like a somewhat average guy. He was making small talk with me, and I was being nice, because I could imagine how rough the first day of high school. I was probably the first person we officially met in the school. That period, we had to get into Paris for an assignment, so obviously Craig asked me to work with him. I had to say yes, why not? I didn't have any close friends in this class anyway. We had the laptop car at this period to begin work on the assignment, so we all had laptops. I could tell pretty quickly I didn't like Craig's sense of humor. He joked too much and was acting like we were good friends. But his jokes weren't normal, and he'd have this cringy laugh every time he made a joke. He cursed every other word, and he'd make constant, dirty, vulgar jokes. I was no softie when it came to that, but it was just too much with him. By the end of the period, we had to exchange numbers for the projects. Then it was on to my next class. Eventually came launch time. Mike didn't come to school for that day, so it was only Liam and I at our little circular lunch table. Suddenly I see Liam's eyes look up at someone behind me. Then someone pulls up a chair next to me, and I look and see Craig. He pats my shoulder and says, "What's up, buddy?" I kinda died a little inside. This meant he'd be sitting here every day. I tried to be positive and give him a chance. Maybe he wasn't that bad. Liam tried being nice at first, but eventually Craig started saying weird again. And Liam caught on that something was off. And he kept shooting at his knowing faces when Craig wasn't looking that lunch period. Cemented the fact that something was off about Craig. I'm not judging anyone for being antisocial, but something about him seemed dark. Like the awful things he'd say. It went beyond an antisocial personality after school. Since it was a Friday, I walked home and started texting my group chat about what we were doing. My walk home, I got a text from an unsaved number, and when I opened it, I realized it was Craig. He said, "Turn around." I did and saw Craig running down the sidewalk towards me, waving. Oh God. I sat under my breath. I waited for him. When he caught up to me, he asked how far I lived from school. I said about a 10-minute walk, and he said same, and he said he'd walk with me. Then he asked if I wanted to work on the assignment real quick and bang it out over some beers. I told him I was actually going to be busy with my friends. He asked what I'd be doing. He was trying to invite himself. I said we'd just be chilling at Liam's house. And he actually asked if it was cool. He came. I didn't even know what to say. I came up with some BS, like Liam's mom doesn't let strangers in right away. It seemed to work. Craig kept walking, and I started wondering, is he following me all the way home? That's what he did. I got to my house and said, "All right, see you later," and gave him a little fist bump. He said, "See you later," and kept walking down the street. I noticed him look back, so I looked away. I texted my group chat about how weird he is, and Liam backed up. What I was saying, we went about making plans to hang out at Liam's house for real, but not until like 9 o'clock. After an hour or two later, Craig texted me something disturbing. He said, "Yo, what's going on in front of your house? Why is there a cop car?" I replied, "What do you mean?" We rushed to go outside to confront Stu. There were no cop cars. It was just Craig standing in our driveway. He was laughing. He laughed and said, "I got you." Then he said, "I thought you were going to your friend Liam's place." I said, "Yeah, in a little bit." Then I said, "Why are you being weird?" He didn't laugh at that. I saw he was visibly offended. I said, "I gotta go inside," so I did and shut the door. He texted me all offended, saying, "Bro, WTF." I was speechless. I just met this kid today. I spent 40 minutes with him. Why was he obsessing over me and following me? And now stalking me. He literally tricked me into coming outside to see if I was home. I texted him back, "You're freaking me out, bro." I guess that was a mistake. He sent me some long message about how he thought I seemed chill and was different from the rest, but how I'm just like everyone else. I sent a screenshot to my friend group, and they were all laughing and shocked. At the same time, I emailed my teacher and asked him if I could do the assignment myself and explain the situation. Then I left my house and walked to Liam's house just to get out. While I was at Liam's, Craig tried calling me. I just let it ring in the door. It was going to be awkward. Day of class, come Monday morning, skipping ahead to when I got home around 11 or 12. My parents and sister were out. My parents might have been out with friends, and my sister may have been with her boyfriend. Nothing unusual. I locked the door behind me and went up to it. I started watching YouTube videos. I heard the back door ring. Yes, our house has a back doorbell. It had a different ring than the front doorbell. I hopped up and went downstairs, expecting to see my sister at the back door, but the lights in the backyard were off, and no one was on the other side of the door. I could see through the glass. I opened the main door, with the screen door still locked. I said hello, and I 100 heard the sound of someone's shoes scraping the concrete patio just to the left out of view from the door. I shut the door again and relocked it and went back upstairs to call my dad, who didn't pick up. But just then my phone started ringing again. It was Craig. I didn't pick up. He then texted me saying, "Come outside, bag." I replied, "I'm calling the police." And to my surprise, he replied, Okay, I'm leaving." It was him. He was hiding in the yard waiting for me. To come out, I sent the screenshot to my family and friends, and then to the school, reach out to his parents. Apparently, this this was the exact reason the troubled family had to keep moving, because he would keep causing issues with people in every school he went to. I can only imagine the horrible things he's done to other people who didn't want to be his friend. He didn't show up to class on Monday, or ever again, if I had to guess. I think he once again transferred schools. Music. I live in rural New Brunswick. It was early September, and it was my first day of school. I unfortunately was held back my senior year, so I'd be returning as a 19-year-old. I lived in rural. So the middle school and high school was the same building, which also meant I knew most of the kids since it was a smaller school. When I got to school, I had study hall period A, which was the first period of the day. However, I noticed a new kid that I never met before on the other side of the room. I walked over to him and introduced myself. He introduced himself to me as Chester, and that he just moved here. I showed him around the school and showed him where his next class is. As I was giving him a tour of the school, I noticed he seemed a bit off as I was showing him around. He began to ask me questions. At first, they seemed normal, like how long I've been at the school or where our classroom was. But then he asked me some questions that seems more strange. One question he stood out the most. He asked for my address and Snap. I was completely thrown off by this because I found it off to ask that I ended up not giving him my address, but I thought, why not to give him my Snap? I gave him it and went on with my day. When the last period of the day came, I had English class. When I got to it, I noticed that there were only about 9 kids in the class. I was in the lowest level English class, so I wasn't expecting a lot of kids to be in my class. I took my seat, and that's when I looked 120 degrees behind me and saw that Chester kid eating a disgusting sandwich. He stared at me from the opposite side of the room and gestured for me to walk. Over to him, my English teacher, Mr. Bess, was about to start class, so I ignored his and went on with the class. 5 minutes later, I looked up from my book and I noticed Chester again, staring at me this time. He was more pissed off looking. Again, he gestured for me to walk over to him, and again, I continued reading my book. Then my phone pings. It was a Snapchat message from Chester. He said, "Follow me." I replied, "I can't." We're in the middle of class next. I saw him get up from his table and ask Mr. Bess if he could go to the bathroom. He then walked out into the hall. I wanted to see why. He wanted me to follow him. So 5 minutes later, I asked Mr. Bass if I could go to the bathroom as well. I then walked out into the hall. I didn't know where he went, so I looked down each hallway and eventually I saw him use. Walking really slowly about 50 feet away, I stayed at a distance behind him so that he wouldn't know I was there. He then turned down a hallway in the school that wasn't really used for classes. It was more for storage bathrooms and offices. I then saw him open a door. He walked inside and shut the door behind him. I walked over to the door he walked in and recognized it to be the door that led to the school's basement. There was no way in hell I was going down there. I just casually went back to my class. When I got back, my phone rings. It was him again first. He sent me a message saying, "Why did you enter the basement?" He then sent a picture of him eating a disgusting sandwich in the basement. He sent one more chat asking me to walk down into the basement. By now, I was getting creeped out by the kids. So I replied, asking him to leave me alone. I then removed and blocked him when I got home. I immediately started on my homework. By the time I was done, it was about 11 p.m. and I was home alone. I was putting all of my homework away. Just then, my phone received a notification from Snapchat. Someone added me as a friend. It was from an account called "Why Didn't You Enter the Basement?" It was him, so I blocked it. Then a couple minutes later, I got another request this time. The account was called "Why'd You Block Me?" I blocked that one and then another one came. This one was even more animus. It was called "I Know Where You Live," followed by a "Right Outside Your House." And just then, I heard a window break downstairs. I immediately called the cops and told them what was happening. And the operator said, "Find a safe place to hide and lock the door." I then hung up and went into the hallway closet. I heard footsteps move from downstairs to upstairs, cracked open the closet door, and I saw him at the end of the hallway in the dark. I saw Chester. It didn't seem like he knew that. I noticed him until he turned his head to look at the closet, but it didn't seem like he knew I was inside. I didn't close the door, but I hid deeper. In the closet, Chester then went over and opened the door. I was hiding behind a large container. While he struggled to find the light, he eventually gave up, and I heard his footsteps fade away. Downstairs, seconds later, the police knocked on the door. I immediately opened it and told him what happened. But by the time they arrived, Chester was gone, and there was nobody on my property. They found out that he escaped through a window in my basement. I gave the police the accounts, and they said they'll do their best to trace them the very next day of school. I went to the principal to report Chester, but the creepiest thing was what he told me. My principal said that there was nobody in the whole school named Chester. There were no records of him ever having been a student. I got chills. The camera footage was checked, and it turned out that he snuck in through a back entrance of the school and blended in with the other kids. I never saw him again in school, and I never heard from the police. But to this day, I still think about why he wanted me to go into the school basement. All I can say is that was probably the most dangerous person I'd ever met, and I don't know what his intentions were. As our journey through the shadowy corridors of the unknown comes to a close, remember, the realm of nightmares is vast and ever expanding. If you dare to delve deeper into these chilling tales, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Nightmare Realm channel. Your support is the beacon that guides us through the darkness. Stay alert, stay curious, above all, stay brave. Until next time, keep your eyes open. The next tale just around.
We asked the BuzzFeed community to submit their weirdest paranormal encounters. These are the stories that sent us 3 or 4 years ago. I used to be in my old school's netball team. One day we were waiting for the teacher to come so we could start training. I was in the middle of the pitch, and suddenly the lights went out blindly. I tried to find my way back to the other girls, but I tripped over something cold and hard. Out of nowhere, a cold, small hand touched my bare leg, squeezing and rubbing it up and down, as if it, like me, was trying to find a guide in the dark. Out of fear, I asked, "Who is it?" And a feminine, childlike voice, "Androids, it's me," and giggled playfully shortly after the lights came back. I was in one corner of the pitch, while the other 3 girls were huddled close together in the opposite corner. There was no trace of whatever thing had been next to me. I worked at a nursing home, and on one particular rainy night, I was sitting next to one of my residents that had severe dementia out of nowhere. She started screaming bloody murder and shaking a wrinkly, disfigured finger across the room, screaming, "She's dead. She's dead." She'll push her around the building to try and calm her down. That's when I found out that a woman who lived on the other side of the building had just passed away now 5 minutes. Before music, when I was about 6, I was in the bathroom of my grandma's house playing Bloody Mary with my slightly older cousins. We were sitting on the floor in a circle. The only thing behind me was a wall. And when they were doing the chant, I placed my hand on the ground. She uses leverage to scoot myself in the corner for protection. When I did that, I touched bare foot that was directly behind me. It felt like it was actually coming directly out of the wall. I screamed for someone to turn on the lights, and when they did, there was nothing later. Everyone's shoes were on, so it couldn't have been one of our feet. My mom and I were visiting friends and family in Alabama. We were at her friend Amy's house, and they were telling me about all the dumb, scary pranks that did in high school and different urban legends from the area before we left for the night. Amy told us a story. My mom apparently hadn't heard sans she had moved away after high school. I was sitting on the trunk of the rental car. She told the story in the driveway of her house. The story was about a specific 4-way stop where a woman had been hit and killed by an 18-wheeler. It was a hit and run. They say that the ghost of this woman jumps on the steps of 18-wheelers that pass through, checking to see if it's the driver that killed her. Needless to say, we had to go through this forward stop to get home. We got closer and closer to the stop. Couldn't really see when it was coming up on a kind of very little lighting in the back roads of Alabama. My mom and I were joking about how glad we were that we weren't in a big truck. Next thing I know, my mom says, the trunk is open. I laughed and said, "Shut up. That's not funny," thinking she was trying to scare me. She pointed to the illuminated light in the dashboard, alerting us that the trunk was in fact open. We pulled up to the four-way stop. "Can you hop up and close it?" she asks. "Oh no," I scream, "you get out and close it." We looked at each other for a moment and decided to wait until we came to a well-lit parking lot to go. Close it. I kept looking back to make sure it hadn't flown open. My mom drove through the four-way, an excruciatingly slow pace to make sure it stayed down. Then I got to thinking, wasn't I sitting on the trunk before we left? All of a sudden, the trunk slams shut. That means slams like full force from fully open, slamming down my mom. And I had one of those comical movie moments where we turned to look at each other, turned back, and then screamed bloody murder among them, Florida, and we raced to the nearest parking lot, frantically screaming nonsense, trying to explain what could have happened. The trunk light was still off when we pulled up into the lot. A Hardee's, we both got out of the car and went around at the trunk on the bottom of the trunk lid to where you touch to close it. We're to muddy footsteps with digging through my mother's bookshelves. When I was a child one day while rummaging, I found a book on the occult, so I decided to take it up to my room and make a pact with the devil. Alone in my room, I read aloud various parts of the book till I was certain I found an incantation that was sure to bind my soul to the Dark Lord. Immediately upon finishing the vow, the little overhead light in my bedroom went out. I do not although completely shattered too. This day, I'm not entirely sure I have ownership over by a mortal soul, my boyfriend, that I went camping together one weekend. This was back before digital cameras were things, so we brought a few disposable ones. We had a good day and took lots of pictures. We went to sleep that night in our sleeping bags with the tent completely as of done. After the trip, we went and dropped off our cameras to get developed, and when we picked up the pictures we saw, there was a series of photos taken of us from inside the tent while we were sleeping that we all was a different size. I thought right away that my boyfriend, a friend, come and take them as a prank, but I was looking at his face when he saw the pictures. He definitely didn't know about them either. To this day, we don't know who took the pictures. Music. I was getting ready for bed late one night, wearing minimal clothes because it was a hot summer night with the windows open. I clicked off the bedside lamp and turned over to go to sleep. It was pitch black in my room because that's the only way I could sleep. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard clear as day the shutter became or click from over my shoulder. I whirled around and fumbled for the light, but when I turned it on, there was no one in sight. I shrugged it off as my imagination, and I hesitantly turned the light back off and curled up once more, just as I completely dismissed any fears as an overreaction. I heard a low chuckle coming from over my shoulder once more. My bedroom is on the second floor. Music. My house was built in 1923, and my whole family has had eerie experiences. From a ghost who we assume is the man who built the house. He passed away from a heart attack in the bedroom, but had a good life. man was known to be a nice person, so we aren't scared of his presence, just creeped out when we hear whistling in the kitchen and no one is in there, or hears someone walking downstairs when we are all in bed. The scariest thing that happened was when I was about 15 years old and was getting ready to take a shower. The water was running, but I had to pee first, and as I was sitting on the toilet, I felt the hair in the back of my neck stand up in the air suddenly went cold. Then a man's voice yelled in my ear. Yeah, I could feel the breath from the side of my face. I was frozen in horror and was finally able to get the guts to bolt on stairs. To brew the naked, to the surprise of my mother who was cooking dinner. She could tell I was horrified, but just gave me a blanket to wrap myself in and laughed her ass off. My uncle died when he was 23. It was a violent and angry death. He took his own life. I was born a year to the day he killed himself after being 2 weeks late already because of that. I've always felt like I have a connection with him. One summer, my cousin and I were sitting in his old bedroom talking about what we thought he was like. We decided to try and contact him with a makeshift Ouija board. But of course, we both shouted at the other for moving it, and it was a bit of a bust. I don't really believe in the Ouija thing anyway, so we went to bed. We were woken up in the morning by a granny asking us who had broken it, that she wasn't mad, she just wanted to know who had broken it. We had no idea what she was talking about, so she led us to the front room, where a photo frame with a picture of her late uncle was on the floor with the glass smashed. The recent birthday cards from my granddad were still all propped up on the fireplace. Condolence cards from my late uncle's would-be birthday were scattered on the floor. My brother often stays up really late and annoys me when I'm trying to sleep one night. I woke up and saw a dark, tall figure in my doorway, so I yelled at my brother to go away. The figure stayed there, just staring at me. I got fed up yelling at my brother, so I sat up, and that's when I saw the figure more clearly. Its eyes were hollowed out and had a small head and a long white neck. I sat back in bed, terrified, and the figure kind of turned and crumbled in on itself like it was dissolving into particles and made the sound of someone exhaling. I still have no idea if it was real or just a hallucination, but it was horrible to say the least. Back in high school, my friend Amber claimed her house was haunted after a night of dinner and shopping with the usual friend. We stopped back at her house so that she could let the dogs there. Two weird things happened. First, the three of us all over Amber's living room for the dog leash, but couldn't find it. We left the room to look for it somewhere else, but when we came back, the leash was sitting on a coffee table in plain sight. There's no way that all three of us could have missed it after searching for 10 minutes. It was like someone had put it there when we left the room. Second, Amber goes to take the dogs outside, and my other friend and I are just out in Amber's living room, waiting. All of a sudden, we hear a man's deep voice call out Emma's name. We both respond. She's in the backyard, taking the dogs out. We'd assumed it was her stepdad, her brother, who had just returned home. Amber comes back inside, and we told her that her stepdad, her brother, was looking for her. But she told us they weren't in town. They went get. We looked all over the house for a family member, but nobody was home. I work in a Titanic museum filled with real artifacts. We usually hear little things at night, but don't even think about them. But one night we were following the last guests out and cleaning up behind them like normal. I happened to glance through a window into the captain's bridge and saw an officer there against the back wall. He looked up, made eye contact with me, and nodded. I instantly had chills down my spine and just ran out of there. None of the guys who dress up were working that night, and when I got downstairs, I glanced at a picture of the original 1912 crew and came face to face with the officer I saw upstairs to conclude your videos. On the channel, Nightmare Realm in a way that aligns with the theme of your spooky content. Consider using a creative and eerie outro. Here's a suggestion. Did these tales send shivers down your spine? If you dare for more, remember to whisper your allegiance to the Nightmare Realm by gently pressing the like button. Share these hauntings with the brave souls you know, and subscribe to wander deeper into the realm of nightmares. Until next time, keep one eye open, and remember, the realm is always watching. This outro plays on the theme of the channel, encouraging interaction in a way that keeps the viewers engaged and in tune with the eerie atmosphere of your content.
A good horror story is even more chilling when it is based on a true one. Whichever way may be portrayed either through books, movies, or other mediums, the fact remains that the events that occurred was once upon a time someone's haunting reality. In this case, it was the realities of the DeFeo and Lutz families during their time in the Amityville home in New York in the autumn of 1974. A family of 7 would suddenly be reduced to just one surviving member, the one who committed the crime before that fateful night. The DeFeos weren't exactly a happy household, with rumors of Ronald Sr. being hostile, abusive, overbearing, and dominant. His way of fathering is believed to have caused Ronald Jr., also known as Butch, developed into a troubled young adult. The DeFeos owned an auto body shop where Butch was employed, but he would often spend his time at bars instead of at work. Butch eventually became addicted to drugs and alcohol, which led him to become violent towards his family. An incident had occurred where he reportedly pulled a gun on his father, and there were other times where he would physically lash out at his family. In the early hours of November 13, 1974, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. snapped with rifle in hand. Butch went from room to room, murdering his family members one by one as they slept. One of the peculiar things about this incident is that while the murdering unfolded within an estimated 15-minute time span, the way the bodies were found showed no signs of struggle. In addition, the sounds of gunshots oddly did not wake any of the other family members, or at least it didn't draw them on the bed. The bodies were found all face down on their beds, as though they'd been positioned that way to add to the strangeness. The rifle reportedly had no silencer, and aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing even a single gunshot going off that night. After horrifically murdering his own family, Butch took a bath, got dressed for work, and eventually reported the murder, claiming he discovered the grisly scene after arriving home from his job. He went so far as to propose that it was the work of a mafia hitman. Accompanied by 2 accomplices, he said that they showed up at his house that morning, put a gun to his head, and forced him to kill his family members. His alibi wouldn't last long under scrutiny, where DeFeo eventually broke under pressure. Admitting to the murders, he later showed police where he discarded the rifle and the bloodstain. Close in his confession, he stated, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop it." It went so fast, it was said that Ronald Jr. was hearing voices that influenced him to carry out the murders. However, the prosecutors had a psychiatrist argue against that, who then diagnosed Ronald with antisocial personality disorder, meaning that Ronald hadn't actually been hearing voices, nor had he been possessed by another personality. He just thought that the killing of his family was not wrong. Defeat was convicted by a jury for 6 counts of murder and sentenced him to 6 consecutive life terms, which he is still serving at the Survivor Correctional Facility in New York. There is still a theory that a second killer was also present, but never caught just a little over a year following the mass murder of the DeFeo family. The DeFeo residence on Ocean Boulevard had become the dream home for a new family. The Lutzes with the Amityville home riddled in its gruesome past one. Can't help but wonder about the possibility of the residual energy lingering on the property, haunting the ground it was trapped on, but one wouldn't have to wonder for very long before the lunches would come forth with their alleged not-so-housewarming stories after house hunting for what seemed like forever. George and Kathy Lutz finally came across a listing for what they didn't realize at the time. Was the DFO home. They decided to check it out, and while the house was over their original budget of $30,000 to $50,000, they for some reason found themselves drawn to the attractive, hip-roofed colonial house with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a large boathouse on the Amityville River. And despite being informed about the house's murderous past, the Lutzes fell in love with the home and decided it would be theirs. They purchased it at the bargain price of $80,000 and never once considered the house to be uninhabitable due to its past, and similarly to the Hollywood betrayal kills his whole family. Doesn't that bother you? Why are you sure? But they felt that houses don't have memories, but the Lutzes dream home. Would quickly become one of a nightmare. The events that soon followed would eventually be known to the public through the work of author Jay Anson, who wrote and captured the events in his infamous book, The Amityville Horror. Prior to moving into the house, George Lutz was an active businessman, but immediately after moving in, he underwent a sudden personality change, becoming sluggardly chilled and cranky. He found himself waking up at 3:15 a.m. every night and was unable to go back to sleep. Come to find out, it was at this time that the DFO murders took place. Music one night. He saw his 5-year-old daughter Missy standing by her bedroom window with the outline of a pig's face. With red eyes behind her, he quickly ran inside her room only to find his daughter sound asleep. Shortly thereafter, Missy began speaking of a new friend. She was playing with a pig named Jody in another chilling instance. George looked down on his wife Kathy while she was sleeping and saw her face had changed and seemingly aged her as if she was a 90-year-old woman. Apparently part of the house's effect on Kathy was that she would go through periods where she aged unnaturally fast and appeared to be another person altogether. This was reportedly also witnessed by her mother. Strange things continued to happen, such as doors ripped off hinges, a room full of flies in the middle of winter, cloven hoof prints in the snow just outside their doors, green slime oozing on the walls, and the discovery of a secret room in the basement that was nowhere. On the house's original blueprint, this room was painted blood red and was only big enough for 2 people to sit, intimately close, but also gave off an intermittent odor. George even tried to take their family dog down there instead of an attempt. He just wouldn't go in. He backed away. It's the only time I can recall him. Ever cowering from something, one night George heard the sound of a band playing downstairs. And when he went into the living room to investigate, there was no one there, but the rug had been rolled up and the furniture had been moved, as if someone had made space for dancing. The priests they enlisted to help them also experienced a variety of strange phenomena and illness. After getting involved with the house, the Amityville horror author Jay Anson said, meeting the priests solidified his decision to write the book, saying because it was corroboration, this was actually happening to someone. This was not an exorcist or an omen from there. I started to create the book on January 14th, 1976. After just living 28 days in their new home, a particularly scary night drove the Lutzes to suddenly pack their bags, leaving the rest of their belongings behind, never to return again. They didn't expect to leave forever that day. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, we didn't get up to leave that morning. We need to understand that this was our house. We lived there when we left. We didn't know when coming back. We didn't know that what we were leaving behind we will never see again, their belongings at the house, according to a Washington Post article from 1979, or to be auctioned off later. The Lutzes shared the supernatural phenomena that they experienced in their time living in the Amityville house with Anson, who eventually turned their true story into an instant bestseller in 1977. The Allied Times hailed it as fascinating and frightening. Some critics have said that its popularity reflected the rocky political climate in the United States at the time, which included rampant inflation, rising interest rates, and a massive oil shortage, all signaling a depressed economy as the narrative unfolds. The reader also sees the family struggling as their business is impacted by the failing economy, as well as an IRS investigation into the family's taxes, at the worst possible moment, making everything in the book all too familiar to readers who were living a similar reality at the time. By aligning something supernatural with the current events of American life, the book turned out to be very relatable. It was also said to have exploited contemporary popular trends of the pulp horror genre, including a family patriarch who is drinking and mean, and out of his normal character, has seen the Shining enlisting or forcing a priest to help them against. His will or better judgment, like The Exorcist, as well as excessive vomiting, also in The Exorcist, and even the setting of a northeastern beach town like Jaws music. When asked if Anson himself had experienced anything strange while writing the book, he said, "Leave it." No, though he did note that he had a heart attack after writing it, which he felt was unrelated blame. But on my smoking, my idiot lifestyle, I'm not going to blame it on this. However, Anson did say that some of the people who had read the original manuscript or had early copies in their possession did have strange things happen to them. 3 of his friends, along with one of their children, had separate brushes with death. One was fatal. The first had a fire break out in his car as he was driving back to the publisher with the manuscript. The second friend and his son nearly drowned in their car, while a copy of the manuscript was in their trunk. Reportedly, when the car trunk was opened, the only thing that was still dry inside was the manuscript, despite the fact that it had only been held in a clasped envelope, and the third friend, who Manson had given the first 2 chapters to read, died in a fire. The first night she received them, and in the remains of the fire, the manuscript was found in perfect condition. There have been several film adaptations of the story, including a 1979 version starring James Brolin, and a 2005 version starring Ryan Reynolds, both actors taking on the role of George Lutz. The book and both movies are loyal to the setting and the true backstory of the house where a grisly mass murder had occurred. Both films were said to deviate from the original story slightly, to add to the terror of the hauntings, such as the addition of a babysitter in both films who watched the kids, while George and Kathy in the 1979 version went to Kathy's brother's wedding. I don't want to go to bed, I want to play with Joel in the 2005 version. They just had a night out in the book. The entire family attended the wedding. The 1979 version also begins with the murders, like the book, but in a way that features the house itself as the haunted coming from within. Vessel House, in contrast to the 2005 version, which portrayed the murder victims in a way that would focus on their ghosts rather than the house. Another thing that is noticeably different between the book and the movies is that they all establish slightly different versions of what happens to the priest, all of whom have different names in the book. He hears a voice yelling at him to get out, and then experiences flu-like symptoms when he interacts any further with the Lutzes, ultimately giving up on helping them to essentially go on vacation. But in the movies, there are physical effects on him, like when he is attacked in the house by supernaturally controlled flies, and ultimately goes blind. Hello? Kathy Fogg, Delaney. There's something very important on the whole. The 2005 version was said to make more things up entirely, and the 1979 film features certain things that happened in the book that the other film excluded, but with less context apart from the mystery surrounding Ronald DeFeo Jr., hearing voices that led him to kill his entire family in 1974, and the supernatural phenomenon experienced by the Lutzes in 1975. There have been no other known stories or accounts of hauntings in the ocean around the house, according to the Washington Post and realty firm Coldwell Banker. Harbor Light owner Jerry O'Neill. The house has been owned by 4 different families since the murders in 1974. Its address was changed by the request of a previous owner who lived in the house following the Lutzes. The last time the house was listed for sale was in the summer of 2016, and it sold for $605,000 in February 2017. According to Zillow, before that, the house was sold in 2010 for $950,000. While there are some debates on whether or not the Lutzes story was true, the fact remains that a mass murder of an entire family did indeed take place on that property. That is undeniable. The supernatural has been known to turn skeptics into believers, so whether it's a trinket, a piece of clothing, or an entire house, be careful what you decide to acquire, because you may end up with far more than you bargained for. you if you found this deep dive into the eerie and mysterious world of the Amityville horror. Intriguing? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Join our channel, Nightmare Realm, for more chilling tales and haunting stories. Uncover the truths lurking in the shadows and become a part of our community that explores the spine-tingling corners of the unknown. Your support helps us continue unraveling the mysteries that await. Subscribe now and step into the realm of nightmares.